We're very honored today to have a talk from one of the world's leading human rights lawyers, Asma Jahangir, one of Pakistan's and the world's leading lawyers fighting for human rights. Tomorrow she'll receive an honorary degree from the University as a Doctor of Laws from the University of Pennsylvania in our main graduation ceremony. And we're tremendously grateful here today at the law school to have the opportunity to hear her discuss her work in Pakistan, defending the rule of law, defending the most vulnerable populations among Pakistan's citizens, particularly women, children, religious minorities, and the poor. My colleague will give a fuller account of Ms. Jahangir's accomplishments and allow me to introduce our Associate Dean of International Programs, Rangita de Silva de Alves. I'm new as Dean of the law school. This is my first year, although I've been on the faculty for a dozen years. And Rangita is new as well. I think she's got a few months' experience on me. She's been just over a year as our Associate Dean of International Programs and Global Programs. We've seen a tremendous energy in the building and really around the world, intense global engagement that Dean de Silva de Alves brings, and it's wonderful to have her as a colleague. She's an internationally known human rights scholar who has worked in over 25 countries with a vast network of academic institutions, government agencies, and non-governmental organizations. She's worked and focused on issues of women's human rights, policymaking, and institutional reform, and has served as an advisor to UNICEF, UN Women, the UN, and UNDP. She teaches a very cutting-edge, rigorous, and popular seminar on women's human rights here at Penn Law. And she's played a critical role in our recent initiatives, including partnering with the UN in New York and UNESCO in Paris, where we'll be placing 10 students as early as next year for credit with those organizations working on cutting-edge legal issues around the world. Rangita, like me, in the midst of this stellar CV, made the wrong choice for law school. She holds a Harvard degree, as I do. But we're thrilled to have her at Penn Law, and she's really doing wonderful things with our global programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Ruger, for your support and your leadership in bringing Asma Jahangir here to Penn Law. Asma Jahangir, your conversation on your journey to justice will take place against the backdrop of Pakistan's own tumultuous legal and social change. You are an eminent lawyer and human rights advocate extraordinaire, but something that is less said of you is the role model effect that you have brought to the South Asian region, to the Asian region, as well as to the world. You have inspired the women of your generation, the women of my generation, and now a new generation of lawyers who are about to graduate. You are also someone who has inspired women and men, families, and the community that you work in Pakistan. And with that, I'm thrilled to have with us an old colleague of yours, Salim, and his family here at Penn Law. Salim's father worked as a butler in your father-in-law's home, and his mother as the housekeeper in your father-in-law's and mother-in-law's home. And Salim then went on to be the accountant of the first all-women's law firm in Pakistan, and most powerfully was the witness to your journey. So we are proud to have with us Salim. Thank you, Salim, and your family for honoring us with your presence. Much before Malala, there was Asma Jahangir. And Asma Jahangir has often said, we are all Malala's mothers. And I think that is so evocative and poignant, because we often forget that Malala stands on the shoulders of giants, giants like Asma. Your story, Asma, is the stuff of legend. It almost reads like a heroic epic. But the fearful reality is that many of those battles are real. They're not stuff of myths. And I think that's really what is so powerful and what I wanted to touch on this afternoon. You have said that Pakistan is a place of what you call contradictions and double narratives. It's a narrative of repression, state-led repression, and sometimes repression by religious heads and mullahs, but it's also a place of enormous resistance, resistance by civil society, and you have been at the forefront of the resistant narrative. And I think that's what makes you so powerful an advocate. Bookmarking your journey to justice are two major events, and I want to touch on those two major events. Your idyllic childhood in Lahore was interrupted brutally when in the early 1960s, Ayub Khan, the first military leader in Pakistan, sent a cadre of leaders in the middle of the night with torches to take your father to prison. And you still remember how he said tata to the children and left in the police armored cars. And he was in prison for 14 years while you came of age. And then in 1969, in protest, you scaled the walls of the governor of Lahore, and you hoisted a black flag in protest of your father's imprisonment, becoming not only your father's biggest advocate, but one of the most prominent human rights advocates of that time, during a very difficult time in Pakistan. You were suspended from school because of that act of resistance. And then in 2012, nearly 35 years later, in the US files leaked by Edward Snowden, it was suggested that there was an assassination plan by Pakistan's powerful and shady ISL. And it is just one of the long list of plots against your life. So what years of tumult and triumph spanned that time period when you climbed and scaled the gates of the governor of Lahore to 2012, when it was revealed to the world that for many years that the largest spy agency in Pakistan had been plotting to kill their most famous human rights advocate. During that span of years, you have been a target of assassinations, spent time in jail, under house arrest. Your family has been threatened. Your property has been attacked. You continue to travel with armed guards. Your staff has been kidnapped. Your daughter's life has been threatened. And once, when you organized a march, the mullahs dictated a fatwa and nullified your marriage and all of the women who marched alongside with you. You have seen a client murdered in your office. You have held some of the highest positions in Pakistan and at the UN. You've represented women, children, and minorities. You've changed the law in Pakistan. You've changed the face of activism in Pakistan. You fought in court and outside court. You walked the corridors of power at the United Nations, but most importantly, you marched the streets of Pakistan. So what I want you to do now is to speak a little bit about some of those stories, the stories of your clients. And I want you to focus on three major aspects of your work. One has been your struggle from day one to change and to roll back the impact of the Haddad Ordinance. The Haddad Ordinance, which was promulgated by Zia-ul Haq, the dictator and the military leader. And the Haddad Ordinance has created havoc in the lives of women, children, and minorities. Women who are raped are not able to go to court because the fact that their evidence is worth half of a man's evidence. And if they are not able to prove that they have been raped, then they are alleged with zina. Zina, which is a crime of a crime of adultery, and adultery is criminalized under the Haddad Ordinance. Women have faced honor crimes, where crimes against their human integrity and human security are considered private crimes and civil law offenses rather than a crime against the public. under the Hudud Ordinance. And thirdly, blasphemy crimes, where under the penal code in Pakistan, even an innuendo against the Quran constitutes an act of criminal liability, and victims face the death sentence. And you worked on these three areas with your clients, but also on a larger platform, trying to change those laws and trying to change those policies, and both in the court as well as outside the court, in what you have created that was not in Pakistan before, a women's action forum, bringing together the women of Pakistan to protest against crimes against their names. So I want you to speak of those stories, beginning with Salmat Mashi's crime, where this 14-year-old young boy faced the death sentence for allegedly desecrating the name of the Prophet when he was only 14 and illiterate. His uncle was murdered in court, and the Christian pastor who supported the family shot himself in protest. And the judge who ruled on this case was shot and murdered. So as you can see, there has been a spurt of murders in the name of the blasphemy laws. So starting with the blasphemy laws, I want you to tell our audience and the students and the graduates of Penn Law and their families those stories of struggle and resistance. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I must thank all of you for allowing me to be here. It's a great opportunity for me. And despite what Rangita says, I can assure you that my work is not that dreadful and boring. What I do comes very natural to me. And Pakistan, despite its horror story, also has many aspects to it where there are challenges that are made from within society. And these challenges are made despite risk. There are a number of people who stand by you. And the fact that Salim and his family is here, it's like an extended family for me. Everybody that I work with, everyone who comes to your hour of need. And just because he's here, I want to say that in our office, there was a murder of a girl. And when I ran up the stairs, I saw that there was two dead bodies first, one dead body lying on the staircase, and he gave me his hand and I skipped over it. And I was a bit teary and I was crying, and so he said to me, "You mustn't cry. If you start crying, what will happen to the rest of the office? They will break away. So take hold of yourself." And I immediately wiped off my tears and I said, "Yes, I think you're right. We have to take hold of ourselves." But let me say that something that Rangita didn't find out, despite her very impressive 200 pages research, was my absolute link to the law of blasphemy. And this is a story I must tell you. Many years ago, in the Women's Action Forum, there was a debate whether a woman's testimony should be half that of a man or not, or whether Ziaul Haq's laws were indeed Islamic or not. So they had a seminar in which I was also invited, along with the Chief Justice of the Federal Shariat Court and the Islamic advisor to the President Ziaul Haq. And I don't know why they made me sit there on the platform with them, knowing my views quite well about religion, because I'm a very irreligious person. And I always say to people that there are many kinds of Muslims, happy-go-lucky Muslims, stout Muslims, conservative Muslims, radical Muslims, dangerous Muslims. So I consider myself one of those happy-go-lucky Muslims. But anyway, while this debate was going on, I also realized that I was already tipped off that there is some intelligence officers in the room, and no matter what happens, I'm going to get into trouble today. And while the debate was going on, I sort of said, "Look, why do you need us to interpret Islam for you to the audience? The fact is that you can interpret it yourself. You can read the Quran yourself, and you can interpret it yourself the way you wish. Because after all, this religion was sent to our holy prophet, who was, and thank God I had the sense to say unlettered. And then I used the Islamic word ummi for the prophet, unlettered. And so somebody from the audience got up and said, "You've called the prophet illiterate." I said, "No, I said unlettered." And there was a very busybody waffer whom we always thought was getting in the way, was somewhere sitting in a corner and taping all this conversation, which we were not aware of. And so I was accused of blasphemy. First, there was a small news item that appeared, and then that news item became bigger. And then one day I was sitting in my house, and I heard on Pakistan television that there is some woman who has said something derogatory about the Holy Prophet. And there has been a resolution passed by the parliament unanimously, if you please, that I should be put to death. Except that the law at that time was not to put to death. At worst, what they could have done to me was put me 3 years in jail. So all night I didn't sleep, because then in the commentary they took my name, because I thought somebody may come, they may attack my house and my children will get hurt. And all night I was calling up colleagues and friends and lawyers and human rights and saying this had happened. But to put the long story short, the lawyers stood by me, Women's Action Forum, each and every woman stood by me, and I was able to ride it over. And all my friends who were also in the assembly said that they weren't there when it was unanimously passed. And I then wondered who had actually passed it, because after I met at least 200 of them, 180 told me that they weren't there in the assembly. So it just fizzled away. The friend who was taping got out the tape, so everything came out, and the worst was over for me. But then people realized, the more radical people, that I would have only got 3 years. And that is how the struggle started on their end, to make the blasphemy law a death penalty. And when that law was promulgated and was then enacted, there was a young boy, 14-year-old, who was accused of writing something blasphemous. To this day, we don't know what it was, because the FIR, or the complaint against him, was that he wrote something, but the complainant rubbed it off, and the complainant wouldn't say what it was, because then he would be committing blasphemy himself. So he rubbed it off, and this 14-year-old boy was put in prison in a small city. And one of our colleagues from the Human Rights Commission went to visit that jail, and this little boy said to him, "Do you know of a woman called Asma?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "Where is she? Why doesn't she come to my rescue? Because I'm here because of her. That law was made because of her," the prisoners tell me. And so Mr. Mehboob came and told me that you must go and defend this boy, and I did. First in that small town where I was threatened, and then somehow I got the case transferred to Lahore, and he was given death penalty to start with, because the judge was under threat, and we were, every day when we went to court, there were lots of people sloganeering that we be put to death ourselves, being Muslims, how dare we take a case of a Christian. And what is so ironical, which I always tell the mullah, is that when you get angry with me, you tell me I'm not a Muslim. But when I take a case of a non-Muslim, you tell me I'm a Muslim. So first make up your mind, am I a Muslim or am I not a Muslim, in your vocabulary. So in any case, then we went into appeal, and it was truly a case where there was no evidence, absolutely none. The court very cleverly asked for top 10 lawyers of the country, criminal lawyers, to come and give their opinion. Out of the 10, 8 said there was no case. And the 3 people who were accused, one unfortunately was already murdered outside the courtroom, outside the courthouse, and there were 2 left, and they were acquitted and then rushed off to Germany. That boy is still there in Germany. He speaks German, fluent German, He's educated now and doing well for himself. But as I've never met him afterwards, but because I think I don't want to give away where he is. But once or twice that he's spoken to me when I'm in Germany, he says, I still miss the place. And I said, you really miss that place? He said, yes, I do miss it. Because after all, there were lots of people who came to my rescue too. So what I'm saying is that yes, it's a nasty place in some areas, but it has a lot of energy and a lot of warmth as well. The judge did get killed. I was attacked. Salim, I think you were there when people came to our house with guns and blades and whatever. They were also arrested later on. What I believe about Pakistan is that there's a certain class in Pakistan and certain institutions in Pakistan who are indeed oppressors. But we have never had, unlike many other countries in our extended region, dictatorships for 20 years or 30 years. The day a dictator has taken over, they have had to confront criticism. And there have been movements for democracy even before I was born. And there will continue to be movements for democracy. There will continue to be movements for human rights, for freedom of expression. And I know so many journalists, for example, which you don't hear about, who actually got publicly flogged during Zia-ul-Haq's period because they stood against censorship. So I also see that side of my country and that side of my society, which makes me feel that yes, all is not lost. And is not lost, because I'm a very fortunate woman that I have seen the change right in front of my eyes. I have seen laws change, I have seen mindsets change. There was a time when I was absolutely abused in the Senate saying that I was corrupting the mind of the youth, and that I was corrupting the mind of women, and that honor killing was a tradition, and it was a tradition very close to the heart of Pakistanis. That same Senate passed a law denouncing honor killing. So I think that that was the day I said victory, victory for all of us who fight oppression. It's not without its good days, and congratulations to each other.
Congratulations to you, Asma. You and your sister Hina have represented many of these women who have been struggling for the right to marry a man of their choice. Whether to marry, when to marry, and whom to marry has been an issue that has been highly contested in Pakistan. And most often, as you have said, marriage in Pakistan is a contract between two men, the bridegroom and the bride's father. And you, through your representation of these women who have sought the freedom to marry, and marry a man, a partner of their choice, you have changed the law in Pakistan. So I want you to share with us the story of Saima Wahid, the young woman who is the daughter of one of the most powerful mullahs in Pakistan, who came to your office seeking that right to marry a man whom she chooses, as well as the story of Saima Sawa, the young woman, once again the daughter of a very powerful entrepreneur and a financial powerhouse in Pakistan, who was killed, murdered by her uncle in the presence of her mother and her father were complicit in her murders. And to this date, the murderers are not in any way held accountable because of the honor crime and the Qisas and the Diyat ordinances in Pakistan.
Well, let me just say that it's very difficult to explain to a foreign audience what the legal system of Pakistan is. It's a bit Anglo-Saxon, it's a bit Islamic, it's a bit traditional, and it's a bit modern. So while you can be forgiven for murder, you will not be forgiven for pickpocketing my iPhone. And that is a contradiction in our criminal justice system. Well, and for years, women have married of their choice. And what is, again, quite strange is that all our folklores, each one of them is about passionate love, which people sing, and how the man who stops the two lovers from meeting is always considered to be the evil man. And yet, when this young woman of 22-year-old woman goes and gets married to a professor, her family takes her to court. Now, with every case that you do, it's not that you win or lose the case, you learn a lot more. For example, I thought to myself, how cruel can people be wanting a 14-year-old boy to be hung? I mean, how can anybody want that? And I saw that people actually not only want that, they were looking for that blood, So it really did, it was an eye-opener for me in many ways. Similarly, the case of Saima Wahid, it was not the fact that this girl had got married and that her family was protesting, but that the judges of the High Court were outraged at the fact that I was actually taking up the case, to the extent that the Chief Justice of that court called one of the police or security persons and said, why doesn't he go and arrest my 16-year-old daughter who was studying in Ladies Cheltenham College in London, because the children at that time had threats, so I had put them there. Put her daughter, he said, in prison, and she will know what women's rights is all about. And this policeman actually went, he told me this, he said he folded both his hands and said to him, I can't do that because I knew her father, and I will never do that. So the policeman had more integrity than the Chief Justice of our court. And I still find, and even to this day, that if the judiciary in Pakistan had a little bit more integrity than they do, we wouldn't have been in the state that we are today. For 1.5 years, I mean, the allegation that they made against me was that my 16-year-old girl had kidnapped this girl, and I was asking ransom money from her. And I will put the story short because they actually tried to kidnap that girl and produce her before a friendly judge where she would accuse me, but it didn't happen. We stopped it. We had to physically fight the people who came to get her with chairs and tables. I don't know whether you were there, Salim, that time or not, and really resist them. And then finally, one of the judges called her to the house, to his house, and took her statement. And that is how at least I could sleep at night thinking that there's going to be no allegations against me. Now, for 1.5 years, this case was argued. And for 1.5 years, this woman spent in a shelter home with the orders of the court that she is not to leave the shelter home, that no one has to meet her. So can you imagine that in this day and age, punishment for a woman to get married on her own free will? And it was subsequently, after 1.5 years, that 2 judges out of 3, with a lot of pressure from public, because there was a lot of press on it, women rights activists used to come there every day for the hearing, and then right-wing parties also started sending women to the court. And the judge said to me, well, surely women are divided on this issue. And I said, no, we are not, because we are committed and we will continue to come to court till the end. They are not committed. They've been told to come. And they will come for 3 days. They will not be here the 4th day. And true enough, they were not there the 4th day. And the women who were committed, they kept multiplying, and there were more and more women activists who were coming, or concerned women who were coming, to not only give moral support to this girl, but to the issue. That girl now lives in Norway. Now that is my regret, that you do these cases for these people, they do get their rights, but they then lose a certain freedom of having to live in the same country. She has now 2 children, and she speaks perfect Norwegian, and her children as well. So she's now in Norway and alive.
So as you said, you have played a very instrumental role in overturning some of the Haddad laws, but the laws still have a painful legacy, and there is much blood in the wake of the Haddad laws. Safia Bibi was this very young, illiterate maid to a very wealthy landowning family, and she was allegedly raped by the landlord's son and became pregnant as a teenager. But she was unable to prove that she was raped because her word was worth half of that of a male witness. And also because of her pregnancy, that then became proof of zina or adultery, which is a criminal offense. And what you did there was, as I said earlier, you fought these cases in court and outside court. You mobilized the Women's Action Forum, and you galvanized them to protest on the streets. And that helped the ruling in that case. So can you speak a little bit about some of the activism that you do, both in and outside court?
You know, Rangita, activism is a strange thing. And I think an activist has to be very stubborn. I recall that when I read in the newspaper about this young woman, I called up various friends and said, let's go and protest. And people said, yes, of course, we'll turn out. And you know how many of us were there? 12 women. And we still decided to go ahead with our banners and protest, and felt really stupid, 12 women protesting on the main streets saying what is happening and down with the Haddad Ordinance. But what happened the next day, when the press covered it, there was an article by one of the most respected journalists who wrote, it's not that 12 women came, it's that why did only 12 come? And that gave a boost. So why I'm telling you this is that there are so many partnerships there that help give you that boost of what you are trying to do. And then I got phone calls, why didn't you tell us we are all going to come? And then there was a long march and a protest. And Ziaul Haq then told the chief judge, who told me later, I mean, their judges are told what to do. And so we were told that please come and plead her case. The decision was already taken to let the woman go because Reuters had given a story, and the story was caught here in the US. And Ziaul Haq was very sensitive about US public opinion. So we used that as well during the 80s, quite well. And I must thank some of the feminists here in the US who helped us greatly during a very difficult period in the 80s, because they were able to lobby in Washington and elsewhere that Ziaul Haq should be reined in as far as women's rights was concerned. So I believe that we can only work through these partnerships and reinforcing each other, regardless of which part of the world you're in.
So on that, and building on US partnerships, you've been also very candid and outspoken about the kind of partnerships that must be forged. And you've been very critical about some of the US foreign policy initiatives that have partnered with the wrong, with the wrong leaders in Pakistan, including Ziaul Haq. Ziaul Haq was supported by the US, and then more recently, the Musharraf regime. And you have said very poignantly, the army is into every business in this country except hairdressing. And the US seems, in your words, to be nurturing all of those businesses except hairdressing, and by providing aid to the worth of $1.5 billion to the Pakistan military. And so can you speak a little bit about that tension? Because at the very platform in which you speak on human rights, where you forge connections with the United States, the State Department, my friend and colleague Amy Gadsden was going to be here with her 2 young daughters, but when she was at the State Department, she encouraged me and was very enthusiastic when I told her that I was going to bring you to the US and to China. So there is this tension, and I wanted to speak a little bit about that.
Well, I think that one has to be very candid about it. I find that there is a lot wrong with our government and our country, and particularly the question of governance. But then when I look at global governance, I don't see any coherence there as well. Pakistan has been both a darling and worrisome for the American government. But for us as Pakistanis, both Pakistan's establishment and the US establishment has been equally worrisome. I find that this is not just for me to think, this is for us to think, that are we going to allow security forces and intelligence agencies to tell us how the future world is going to be shaped? Or are we going to be able to produce leadership with political acumen who are going to give us a more far-sighted, a more holistic policy where we as people of this world can live together in better harmony and peace? I don't see that leadership. I don't see it anywhere. I mean, look at the 2 largest democracies, yourselves and India. I don't need to go beyond that. I think we all understand the kind of leadership that is on the horizon here and that is on the horizon in India. And you are 2 largest democracies. So forget about poor Pakistan. I mean, I sometimes, when I look around, I say, well, at least we have somebody there who's willing to run a race for democracy. Fine. Somebody who's at least can be made more accountable and is relatively reasonable that you can get along with. But I think that it's not simply just our relationship with the US in that regard that worries me. The US has looked at Pakistan from the prison of Pakistan's establishment, not from the fact that what the rights perspective that you are supposed to be looking at, I think, and that is what you are associated with. To give you an example, that September 11th took place, and we all knew that the world is going to change. It would have changed, but it could have also changed in a slightly better way. And for the first time in Pakistan, people started disappearing. First, it was the so-called terrorists and the extremists that were handed to the CIA. But when our ISI thought that they could do that for the largest democracy, people who are pioneers in freedom, they can help themselves too. And then they started picking up people from Balochistan. So disappearances started there. And now disappearances have become a way with the intelligence agencies of Pakistan. There was not a word that was said about this extremely grave human rights violation that took place in Pakistan. During Ziaul-Haq's period, I have to share with you that there was something called the American Center there at that time, and they used to give lectures. So they had a professor come in from California, and we were all invited, and she gave a lecture of how society in Saudi Arabia was absolutely enabling for women, and that women had a lot more rights in Saudi Arabia than they did in Pakistan. And after our lecture, we all got together and said, how dare she come and tell us that? But 2 months later, there was another lecture from another professor who was flown from the US on the same pattern, that Saudi Arabian life, suited women's rights. It was separate but equal. And you know what, Ranjita? We had a protest outside the USIS. And we said, if one more person comes and tells us, you better take that culture back to California. We don't want it here in Pakistan. So there is that kind of resistance as well that you never hear of in Pakistan. I brought with me a photograph that I think is worth $1 million. It's women who are wearing shuttlecock burqa. You know, shuttlecock is like, it's covered from head to toe. And they are having a protest march in Bannu, which is FATA. Protest march in Bannu, asking that they be given their right to vote. And when I see that photograph, I think, yes, we are alive, we are there, we have energy, and we are kicking. But what does worry me about our relationship is, it's fine, it suits you to give money to our security forces. I have no problem about it. But I think that at the same time, they have to be also made accountable for human rights violations. Torture is endemic there, and no one talks about it. There are laws there now, what we call POPA. One law is POPA, and the other one is something action in aid, where you can arrest someone for 90 days and not be made accountable. But then you had your own patriotic law. So where do you begin to make them accountable? Because they now get legislation made in a manner that undermines all norms of human rights. So they got the parliament to say that there will be military courts, and now there are military courts. And the sentences are passed on a stereotype kind of evidence, which is self-confession in each case that I have seen. I think that we need to change, definitely in Pakistan. But I wish that if you changed, it would help a lot, not only for Pakistan, but for many other countries that did look up to you as a country which respected freedoms. Now no more. And now people give you the example, well, even in trying times and in trying times of conflict, they can severely undermine their human rights. Why can we not? If they can pick up people, why can we not pick up people? If they can have a Guantanamo Bay, why can't we have several? If they can have places of detention where people were tortured, why can't we do it? And my answer is, they're wrong. And we must not be wrong. Because I believe that these are the values, these are the principles for which we must fight, because without that, there is no dignity. There is no dignity in life. I don't know how many of you have met people who have been tortured. I have. I don't know how many of you have met people whose sons have been taken away and they haven't found them for years and years. I have. And I can assure you that there can be nothing more hurting, nothing more indignity than fear inside you and torture on your body. Nothing worse than that.
In all the years that I have known you, since I was a teenager growing up in South Asia, what I have seen through your work, through your life's work, is this fierce love for Pakistan and her people. And that is really what has sustained you. And you have told the BBC once, everything is a risk in Pakistan. If you defend women, it's a risk. If you defend non-Muslims, it's a risk. If you discuss religion, it's a risk. But you can't really sit there like a vegetable in your own country. And you have not been a vegetable, Asma. You have been a shining light. And there are many times when your friends, me including, have begged you to leave Pakistan, even for a short period, so that your life and the lives of your family members might be safe. But you've resisted all of those invitations from the topmost law schools and universities in North America and Britain. And you've stayed on. And it's almost like this visceral feeling you have for Pakistan. And that is the spirit, I think, that you bring with you when you travel around the world. And with that, I want to open up this discussion discussion to the audience, and I hope that the law students who will be very soon, in a matter of hours, lawyers, graduating lawyers, have questions for you.
Those who are in detention, sorry, I missed one sentence because there was some noise.
Press? Okay, great, thanks. So I was wondering about the tension between the human rights of detainees in preventative detention scenarios, and balancing that with the need to protect the national security and innocent citizens from removal. What's the best way forward in your opinion? Because we're not doing a very good job.
No, I am very mindful of the fact that there has to be a protection for collective as well. I myself have been a target of terrorism several times. But I think there has to be a difference between national armies and terrorists. While you do expect that national armies will and national security forces will stay within a certain framework, terrorists may or may not. That's why we call them terrorists. And I think that there are certain red lines for me which I do not think that I will go under. Not even for those people who came to kill me. I don't think that anybody has a right to torture. Because it's not a question of torturing a terrorist, or so-called terrorist even. It's a question of the fact that you have somebody who represents your state who's a criminal. Because torturing someone is a criminal act. And these principles have not come out of the goodness of people's hearts alone, but also because they deteriorate society. They deteriorate your own security forces. Yes, how do you balance it? I can somehow go to the extent of saying, all right, if you want to make special laws which don't completely undermine human rights, please do it. If you want to try them in special courts, very, very few of them, please do it. But there also due process ought to be given. Simply because you need protection for the judges there, for the prosecution, for the witnesses to that extent, I think that we have to let things go. But to pick up people without a proper detention order, and to pick up people and not to say where they're taking them. We've had people 4 years in internment centers. Their families do not even know where they are. And 5th year, you suddenly see in a newspaper that they have been through a military trial and given death penalty. Now, that is unacceptable to me. And so when I went to court, I got stay orders on all those executions. And I can assure you that I am not the favorite person of the military in Pakistan. In fact, probably the least. But because, Rangita, why do I'm not a patriotic person in the sense because I hardly believe in borders. But there is an energy in that society. There is a warmth in that society that I have received. And I believe that when you receive that, and when you receive people, when you are protected by so many people, you need to give back to that society. I have learned so much from it, and I need to give back all the time. you cannot be an activist unless you are not driven. And that is the difference between us old civil libertarians, as I call myself, and our colleagues, and the new founded NGOs. That is the difference. We don't do it as a job. We do it because we can't take it. There's an urge. Even if you put me in a cage, that urge will be there. I will not see injustice. I will not see humiliation. I must speak up when it happens, regardless of the consequences. I am not going to sit there, write a long paper saying, oh, what is the word humiliation stand for, and let me do some research on it. No, you have to act immediately. And I learned this very young. I was told by one of my mentors, activism, Asma Jahangir, is not all about roaming in the streets with your slippers. It's your heart, but your head as well. And I think that to be an activist, you have to be a great strategist. And one of the strategies is to have an outreach so that people will be there and speak for you. Today, I speak against the army, and I speak with impunity against them because they know that the lawyer community will stand by me. They know that many people in the human rights field and journalist field, they will stand by me. That is why there is no open threat to me. Now, if they kill me tomorrow morning, I can't say, but there is no open threat to me in the sense they dare not come and say to me, don't say this. That they dare not.
So you mentioned some changes you'd like to see on an international level politically. What can individuals who are interested from the international community do to help without facing the risk, I guess, of cultural imperialism or imposing external notions without a real sense of what's going on? So for those of us who are interested in working to advance these human rights issues, how do we avoid the trap of imposing US notions of what needs to be done on a culture we don't fully understand?
Well, I think there has to be a clarity, The clarity, in my view, is that you should support a democratic process in any country. Don't thrust democracy, because democracy is not a pill that you will put there and flowers will grow. But where we are going to a democratic process, I think it will be extremely useful for the US to support that democratic process. I am not saying that our government and our politicians are the best in the world. They're probably one of the worst. But it's the process that does give you the kind of hope that you see from my face and the faces of other Pakistanis. For example, if there is a procession of the mullahs, there will be also a procession of those that are resisting the mullah. If something has happened in a village now, and a policeman has tortured someone, I brought those photographs, the whole village has come out in protest. And the chief minister has had to take some action. So if the establishment wants to buy every anchor in the media, there will still be others who will say, we will not be bought, and denounce this practice. I believe that in our country, if the democratic process continues to go forward, there is enough strength in Pakistan's civil society that they will be able to bring these politicians in a place where they will have to respect human rights. Now, this same party that is in power, I have press clippings where they used to call me enemy of the country because I am talking about honor killings and this, that, and the other. And when I go to the court and I see posters of Punjab government saying, stop violence against women, harassment of women should be stopped, and they honor me by bringing me to the parliament and asking me what the law should be all about, I actually snigger to myself and say, well, these Johnnies have changed. We have stuck to our principles. And when you believe in what you're doing and you're committed to what you're doing, it's easier to have dialogue and change people's mindset because they're also influenced by the younger generation. And mind you, in my own country, I am best of friends with many of the mullahs. I go to their house. If their wives die for the funeral, if their children get married, I go there. They come to my house for my children's marriage and so on and so forth. But publicly, I will oppose them tooth and nail, and they do oppose me as well. So it's a kind of a strange society where you have a social interaction, but you can violently disagree with each other.
More questions? Amal, Pooja, Sarah? Okay.
Well, I think it's very difficult for me to gauge what percentage. But let me put it this way, that when I look at the ordinary people in Pakistan, they only gain by wanting human rights. They have nothing to lose. So they are your best allies. But as you go higher in terms of people's economic wealth, they're not that concerned about human rights. When you go to girls' colleges and schools, women are more, they are supporters of human rights because they are more vulnerable. So it's not that, I can't say that there would be 20% to 30%, but I would say that there is a critical mass out there that would support human rights. And the fact is that I'm right in saying that there's a critical mass, because politicians will never do anything unpopular. And today, if politicians are getting up and saying honor killing must be stopped because they know that it's a popular thing to do. When today they are saying violence against women should be stopped, they know it's a popular thing to be saying. Nobody, no politician dare get up today and say, well, because there is conflict in this country, we must be given some leeway of torture. I assure you, that politician would be lynched. I mean, very recently, there was a lynching of a woman or a few women in a public protest, and everybody was outraged. Now, previously they would have said, women, why were they there at the protest? They didn't. Nobody said that. Even the mullahs are beginning to change because they have seen even worse what has happened in our country. I mean, you have the terrorists, Islamic terrorists, who are so extreme that the mullah feels that they've lost ground. They can't be extremer than them. So I think things are beginning to change. And also, mind you, that in Pakistan, no mullah has ever got elected to power, ever. So while people may be, let us say, conservative in their views, and they talk a lot in terms of cliches and, for example, they will have no idea how to treat minorities, whether they're linguistic minorities or religious minorities or ethnic minorities. Yet at the same time, they are very sharp in knowing what is good for them. For example, there is a rising demand for education for females, even in the remotest areas of the country, rising demand. And so politicians know that. They are now saying, okay, we will give you education. So I think that this way things will change. They're not going to change overnight. And I do believe that the allies are the non-Muslims in Pakistan, the ethnic minorities in Pakistan, the impoverished in Pakistan, the trade union in Pakistan, because they do want rights.
So change, as you said, will come. And it reminds me of something your daughter said to you when you returned home from jail one night, where she said, all of your struggles will lead to the emancipation of women in Pakistan, but those rights will come just an hour early, just 1 hour early because of your struggles. But you said, well, that's that 1 hour that I'm fighting for. And that is that very precious time period. And during that time period, you've done so much, Asma, including changing the minds of mullahs. I remember a time when I was with you in 2005 in Pakistan, when the mullahs were protesting against girls and women engaging in sports, and you organized a mixed gender marathon in Lahore. And here, your generation of women in your salwar kameezes, ran a marathon, ran or walked a marathon, and this was publicized on TV. You were beaten up publicly, and the mullah said, we can't watch this aberration, this abomination on TV. And you replied, then knock off the TV. That's as simple as that. So with that, I want to thank you, but I want to ask Dean Ruger to conclude. And would you like to say a few words?
Just very briefly conclude with our heartfelt thanks. We're really honored by your presence and your words. It's very inspirational to have you here. And I think we all learned an immense amount and are very proud that you're here at Penn Law. So thank you. And please join, all of you, please join us at the reception after the court.
Thank you very much. Thank you.